The Wyoming wilderness stretched endlessly white, broken only by the twisted metal jutting from the snow like skeletal fingers. Sarah Chen limped through the blizzard, her injured leg screaming with each step, her 6-year-old daughter Emma shivering against her chest. The old mining maps her grandfather left weren't supposed to lead here, to this massive industrial complex buried under 30 years of snow and silence. But Sarah wasn't just any desperate mother seeking shelter. Before Emma, before the accident that destroyed her career, she was Dr. Sarah Chen, MIT graduate, structural engineer, and the woman who'd helped design some of the world's most secure facilities. She recognized military-grade construction when she saw it. Inside the factory's depths, behind walls thick enough to withstand nuclear blasts, she found it, a vault containing thousands of files, photographs, and evidence of experiments that should never have existed. Names of politicians, scientists, children who'd vanished without trace. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what she'd stumbled into. Someone had buried this place for a reason, and now they knew she was here. What would you do if uncovering the truth meant putting your child in mortal danger? But that discovery was still hours away. Right now, Sarah fought against the wind that threatened to knock them both into the snow. Her prosthetic leg, damaged in yesterday's car crash, sparked with each faltering step. The rental car had slid off the mountain road during the storm, and they'd been walking for what felt like an eternity. "Mommy, I'm cold," Emma whispered, her lips blue beneath her pink winter hat. "I know, baby. We're almost there." Sarah had no idea if that was true, but hope was all she had left. The insurance settlement from her accident had finally run out, the medical bills had consumed everything, and this trip to Wyoming was supposed to be their salvation. Granddad's stories about hidden mining claims in the mountains had seemed like fairy tales until she'd found his journals in the attic. The metal structure ahead grew larger as they approached, revealing the scope of something massive buried beneath decades of accumulated snow. Sarah's engineering mind automatically calculated the size. This wasn't a mining operation. The exposed steel beams showed signs of sophisticated construction, industrial-scale ventilation systems, and power infrastructure that would have cost millions. She found an entrance where the snow had carved a natural overhang, creating a cave-like opening into the facility. The heavy door hung askew on reinforced hinges, and Sarah could see that someone had blown it open from the inside. Emergency exit, she realized. Someone had been trying to get out, not in. The interior was dark, but mercifully warmer than the howling wilderness. Sarah set Emma down and pulled out her phone's flashlight, the battery showing a dangerous 15%. The beam revealed a reception area frozen in time, 1980s furniture covered in dust, motivational posters curled and faded, and a reception desk with a nameplate reading Mountain View Research Facility. Research facility, not mining, not manufacturing, research. Emma tugged on her coat. "Mommy, look." She pointed to a vending machine in the corner, its glass front spider-webbed but intact. "Stay close to me." Sarah's unease grew as they moved deeper into the facility. Emergency lighting strips along the floor still glowed dimly, suggesting some kind of backup power system had survived all these years. The hallways were wide enough for heavy equipment, and she noticed reinforced blast doors every 50 feet. What kind of research required this level of security? They found a break room with a couch where Emma could rest while Sarah explored. She tucked her daughter under her own coat and ventured down a corridor, marked Authorized Personnel Only. Her flashlight beam danced across walls, lined with what looked like observation windows, all painted black from the inside. At the end of the hallway, she discovered an elevator shaft. The car was frozen halfway between floors, and Sarah could see it had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone had wanted to make sure nobody could access the lower levels. But there were emergency stairs. Sarah's engineering background told her this facility went deep underground, much deeper than any legitimate research operation would require. The concrete walls grew thicker as she descended, and she noticed something that made her blood run cold: radiation warning symbols, barely visible under layers of dust. 3 levels down, she found the vault door standing open. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls in perfect rows, and a massive table in the center was covered with scattered documents. Someone had been here recently. The papers weren't covered in dust like everything else. Sarah picked up a folder marked Project Winterfall, Classification Level 9. Her hands trembled as she opened it and saw the first photograph, a group of children in hospital gowns, their eyes vacant and afraid. Below the photo, a list of names and dates spanning from 1975 to 1989. Some names had red X marks beside them. At the bottom of the page, a single line made her stomach drop. Phase 2 implementation. Congressional authorization pending. Contact Senator Morrison for timeline. Sarah knew that name. Senator Morrison was running for president. The metal door groaned against Sarah's shoulder as she forced it open another inch. Rust flakes scattered to the snow-covered floor, and the acrid smell of decay hit her nostrils. She squeezed through the gap, her flashlight beam cutting through the absolute darkness beyond. The factory floor stretched endlessly before her, a cathedral of abandonment. Massive machinery loomed like sleeping giants, their surfaces thick with dust and cobwebs. Sarah's breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she stepped deeper into the space, her footsteps echoing off distant walls. This was it. This was her answer. She pulled out her phone and started a voice memo, her words tumbling out in excitement. December 15th, found it. The old Meridian manufacturing plant. Been closed since, God, probably the 80s. Square footage has to be at least 50,000. Perfect for conversion. She paused, spinning slowly to take it all in. Location is remote enough for privacy, but close enough to town for utilities. This could work. This could actually work. The Wellness Retreat Center had been her dream for 3 years now, ever since the divorce left her scrambling to rebuild everything. She'd identified the market gap. Stressed executives willing to pay premium prices for digital detox experiences in authentic, unconventional spaces. All she needed was the right property at the right price, something she could afford with her meager savings and transform through sweat equity. Sarah moved deeper into the factory, her flashlight revealing conveyor belts frozen in time and workstations still scattered with tools. The owner's contact information had been impossible to track down through normal channels, but that often meant opportunity. Abandoned properties sometimes fell through bureaucratic cracks, available for back taxes or through obscure estate settlements. She climbed a metal staircase to what looked like a supervisor's office, its windows grimy but intact. Through them, she could envision the transformed space. Yoga studios where assembly lines once ran, meditation gardens in the loading bays, guest rooms in the administrative wing. The bones were solid. Victorian-era brick construction, built to last. Her phone buzzed. A text from her neighbor. "Kids fine. Emma asking when you'll be back. Drive safe." Sarah smiled, thinking of Emma and Jake probably fighting over the remote right now. Everything she did was for them, to give them stability, to prove she could provide without relying on anyone else. Certainly not on David, whose child support payments arrived sporadically, if at all. She descended to the main floor and headed toward the back of the building, looking for electrical panels and plumbing access. The retrofit costs would be significant, but she'd learned basic construction working summers with her uncle. What she couldn't do herself, she could hire out in phases as money came in. The beam of her flashlight caught something odd near the far wall, a section where the concrete floor seemed newer than the rest, a perfect square maybe 8 feet wide. She knelt and brushed away decades of accumulated grime, revealing clean-cut edges and what looked like hinges along one side. A door, built into the floor. Sarah's pulse quickened as she found the recessed handle. The door was heavy, requiring both hands to lift, and when it opened, her flashlight revealed a set of concrete steps leading down into blackness. The air that rose from below was different, drier, warmer, with an undertone of something chemical. She should leave. Every rational part of her brain said to close the door, walk away, contact the property owner through proper channels. But curiosity won, as it always did. Just a quick look. The stairs led to a basement room that clearly hadn't been part of the original factory. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and filing cabinets stood in neat rows, but it was what sat in the center of the room that made Sarah's breath catch. A vault. Not some makeshift safe, but a proper bank-style vault with a massive circular door and combination wheel. And it was open. She approached slowly, her flashlight beam trembling slightly. The vault's interior was lined with safety deposit boxes, most of them sealed, but several hung open and empty. On the floor lay scattered papers, as if someone had left in a hurry. Sarah picked up one of the documents. It was a bank record, dated 15 years ago. The name at the top made her stomach clench, Meridian Holdings, LLC. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars flowing through accounts she'd never heard of. Another paper, this one a letter on official letterhead. She recognized the seal immediately, the State Attorney General's office. The words, "investigation suspended," and "insufficient evidence" jumped out at her. Her hands were shaking now as she gathered more documents. Names she recognized from newspaper headlines, politicians, business leaders, amounts of money that defied comprehension. Sarah's flashlight flickered and dimmed. The battery was dying. She stuffed the papers into her jacket and headed for the stairs, but stopped at the top. Below her lay secrets that people had hidden for good reason. Above her waited her children, her dreams, her desperate need for this property to be the answer to everything. The smart thing would be to forget what she'd seen, lock the door, bury the truth, focus on her future. But Sarah had never been particularly smart about choosing the easy path. The metal door groaned as Sarah pushed it wider, her phone's flashlight cutting through darkness that felt thick as velvet. The air inside was stale but surprisingly warm, as if the building had been holding its breath for decades. She stepped across the threshold, her boots echoing against concrete floors. The beam of light revealed a vast space, stretching beyond what her phone could illuminate. Overhead, metal beams crisscrossed like the ribs of some massive beast. Along the walls, she could make out the skeletal remains of industrial equipment, conveyor belts frozen in time, control panels with gauges that hadn't moved in years. Sarah moved deeper into the factory, her heart hammering against her ribs. This place could change everything. The structure seemed sound, the roof intact despite the weight of accumulated snow. If she could somehow claim salvage rights or find a way to purchase it cheap from whatever corporation had abandoned, she could transform it into something profitable. Warehouse space, artist studios, maybe even convert part of it into living space for herself and Emma. Her phone battery showed 15%. She'd have to make this quick, but she needed to see enough to know what she was dealing with. The main floor opened into what must have been the primary manufacturing area. Ancient machinery lurked in the shadows like sleeping giants. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed by anything larger than mice. Near the far wall, Sarah spotted a staircase leading to what appeared to be an elevated office area. The management level would give her a better view of the entire space, help her estimate square footage, and assess the building's potential. Her phone's light danced ahead of her as she climbed, each step creaking but holding her weight. The office level was a maze of small rooms with windows that looked down onto the factory floor. She peered into each one. Most were empty except for the occasional desk or filing cabinet left behind like monuments to forgotten commerce. But in the largest office, something caught her attention. Behind what had once been the executive desk, a section of the wall looked different. The paneling was slightly newer, the color not quite matching the rest of the room. Sarah approached it, running her hands along the edges. Her fingers found a seam, then a small depression that felt like a button. The click seemed impossibly loud in the silence. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden passage. Sarah's breath caught. This wasn't just an abandoned factory. Someone had built secrets into its bones. The passage stretched into darkness beyond her phone's reach, but she could see it opened into a larger space. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run back to her car and pretend she'd never found this place. But desperation was stronger than fear. If this factory held secrets, it might hold value, and value was what she needed more than anything. The passage was short, maybe 20 feet, before it opened into a circular room lined with metal walls. But these weren't the rusted surfaces of the factory proper. This metal was clean, polished, maintained. In the center of the room stood something that made Sarah's knees weak: a vault. Not a safe, not a lockbox, but a genuine bank-style vault with a wheel lock and everything. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall and just as wide. The metal was pristine, and when Sarah placed her palm against it, it was cool to the touch. Someone had been maintaining this. Someone had built a secret vault inside an abandoned factory and kept it operational while letting the rest of the building decay. The implications sent ice water through her veins. Her phone battery dropped to 10%, but she couldn't leave yet. She circled the vault, looking for any clues about its purpose or contents. On the far side, she found a small plaque mounted at eye level. She held her phone close to read the engraved text: Blackwood Initiative, Archive 7, Authorization Level Omega. The words meant nothing to her, but they sounded official, government-related. Blackwood Initiative suggested some kind of corporate or military project. Archive 7 implied there were at least 6 others somewhere, and Authorization Level Omega sounded like the kind of classification that came with severe consequences for unauthorized access. Her phone screen dimmed, the battery warning flashing. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. Whatever was in that vault, whatever the Blackwood Initiative had been, it was serious enough to hide in the middle of nowhere and maintain for decades after the cover operation shut down. She should leave. She should walk away and never come back. But as her phone battery hit 5% and the light began to fade, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. Fresh footprints in the dust around the vault. Boot prints that couldn't be more than a few days old. Someone else knew about this place. Someone else was coming here. And they might come back. The drive back to town felt like navigating through a fever dream. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she replayed every detail of what she'd found in that vault. The photographs scattered across her passenger seat seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, their grainy black and white surfaces hiding secrets that made her stomach churn. She pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, the only place in Millbrook that stayed open past 9. The neon sign flickered weakly against the falling snow, casting pink shadows across her windshield. Sarah needed time to think, and more importantly, she needed somewhere public where she could examine the documents without feeling like unseen eyes were watching her every move. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, clutching the manila envelope against her chest. Only 3 other customers occupied the worn vinyl booths, an elderly man nursing coffee at the counter and a young couple sharing a piece of pie near the window. The waitress, a woman Sarah recognized but didn't know by name, looked up from wiping down tables. "Coffee, hun?" the waitress asked, her voice carrying the exhaustion of a long shift. Sarah nodded and slid into the booth furthest from the other patrons. Her fingers itched to open the envelope, but she forced herself to wait until the waitress brought her coffee and retreated behind the counter. Only then did she carefully extract the photographs. The first image showed the factory as it must have looked in its heyday: pristine white buildings surrounded by manicured lawns, with men in suits standing proudly beside what appeared to be industrial equipment. But it was the logo emblazoned on the building that made Sarah's breath catch: Meridian Industries. She'd seen that name before, emblazoned on half the buildings in the county seat, including the hospital where Emma had been treated. The second photograph was harder to decipher. Groups of people in what looked like medical gowns stood in orderly lines outside one of the buildings. Their faces were turned away from the camera, but something about their posture suggested resignation rather than cooperation. In the background, men in military uniforms observed from a distance. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she studied each image, her mind racing to piece together the implications. The dates stamped on the backs ranged from 1952 to 1963, right in the middle of the cold, when paranoia and secrecy ruled government operations. But it was the documents that truly made her blood run cold. Memos bearing official government letterheads discussed population studies and controlled exposure protocols. Names were heavily redacted, but certain phrases jumped out at her with crystalline clarity: acceptable loss parameters, long-term genetic monitoring, and most chilling of all, maintaining security through generational oversight. One partially burned document made her hands shake so violently she nearly dropped it. The header read Operation Evergreen to final assessment and contained a list of surnames that read like a who's who of Millbrook's founding families, including her own maiden name, Henderson. Sarah pressed her back against the booth, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. Her grandfather had been born in Millbrook in 1954. Her grandmother had died young of cancer, as had so many women in her family line. The pattern she'd always attributed to bad luck suddenly took on a more sinister dimension. The diner's bell chimed again, and Sarah instinctively covered the documents with her hands. A man in an expensive coat entered, stamping snow from his shoes. He was tall, well-dressed, and completely out of place in Murphy's diner at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. His eyes swept the room methodically before settling on her booth. Sarah's pulse hammered against her throat as the man approached the counter, ordered coffee, and positioned himself where he could watch her in the reflection of the window behind him. Coincidence, she told herself, but every instinct screamed otherwise. She gathered the documents as casually as possible, sliding them back into the envelope. The man's reflection turned slightly, tracking her movements. When she stood to leave, he reached into his coat, a gesture that could have been innocent but sent ice through her veins. The waitress looked up as Sarah dropped a $10 bill on the table. "Everything okay, hun? You look pale." "Just tired," Sarah managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Long day." She walked toward the exit at a measured pace, fighting every instinct that urged her to run. The man's reflection remained motionless until she reached the door. Then he stood, abandoning his untouched coffee. The parking lot stretched before her like an Arctic wasteland. Sarah's car sat alone under a flickering streetlight, looking impossibly far away. Behind her, she heard the diner's bell chime again. Footsteps crunched through snow, maintaining a careful distance but unmistakably following. Sarah reached her car and fumbled with frozen fingers to unlock the door. In the side mirror, she watched the man stop beside a dark sedan she hadn't noticed before. He pulled out a phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. As she drove away, the sedan's headlights flared to life in her rearview mirror. The metal door groaned as Sarah pulled it open, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness beyond. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying an odd chemical smell that made her wrinkle her nose. She hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But Emma's face flashed in her mind, pale and tired from another sleepless night of coughing, and Sarah stepped forward. The space beyond was larger than she'd expected, stretching into shadows her light couldn't reach. Her footsteps echoed off concrete walls as she swept the beam across the room. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their surfaces thick with dust. A massive desk dominated the center, papers scattered across its surface as if someone had left in a hurry. Sarah approached the desk cautiously, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The papers were yellowed with age, but the typed text was still legible. She picked up the top sheet and read the letterhead, Meridian Chemical Industries. The date made her pause, 1987, just 3 years before the factory's supposed closure. But this wasn't about textile manufacturing. The document detailed chemical compositions, test results, and something called Project Clearwater. Sarah's hands trembled as she read further. Environmental impact assessments, groundwater contamination levels, and buried in the technical jargon, phrases that chilled her: acceptable loss parameters and community exposure thresholds. A sound from somewhere in the darkness made her freeze. Just the building settling, she told herself, but her pulse quickened anyway. She folded several papers and stuffed them into her jacket pocket, then moved to the filing cabinets. The first drawer she tried was locked, but the second opened with a rusty screech. Inside, manila folders were arranged in neat rows, each labeled with dates spanning nearly 2 decades. Sarah pulled out a folder marked 1983 to 1985 and flipped it open. Photographs spilled onto the floor, black and white images of the factory in its operational days, but these weren't the textile operations she'd read about in the town's official history. Workers in hazmat suits moved between massive vats and complex distillation equipment. Warning signs covered every surface, symbols she recognized as chemical hazard markers. Her flashlight beam caught something else, a folder labeled Health Monitoring, Millbrook Township. Sarah's heart hammered as she opened it. Medical records, statistical analyses, mortality reports, the data painted a horrifying picture. Elevated cancer rates, birth defects, neurological disorders, all centered around the neighborhoods closest to the factory, including her neighborhood. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the desk edge for support, the papers crumpling in her grip. Emma's respiratory problems, her own chronic headaches, the unusual number of sick children she'd noticed at the elementary school. It all made terrible sense now. A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the factory. Sarah's head snapped up, listening. Another sound followed, definitely, footsteps, deliberate and measured. Someone else was in the building. Panic flooded her system. She grabbed as many files as she could carry and stuffed them into her jacket and backpack. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sweep of another flashlight beam visible through the doorway. Sarah looked around frantically. The room had no other exit except the way she'd come. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. She could hear low voices now, at least 2 people. Her light caught a gap between 2 filing cabinets, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. She clicked off her flashlight and pressed herself into the narrow space just as beams of light flooded the room. The filing cabinet was cold against her back, metal biting through her jacket. She tried to control her breathing, but each exhale seemed impossibly loud. "Someone's been here," a man's voice said. "Look at the desk. How recent." This voice was different, rougher. "Papers are disturbed. Could be from this morning." Sarah's mouth went dry. Through the gap she could see the men moving around the room with practiced efficiency. They weren't casual trespassers. They knew exactly what they were looking for. "Check what's missing," the first voice ordered. "If any of the Clearwater files are gone, we have a problem." The second man moved to the filing cabinets. Sarah held her breath as he examined the drawer she'd ransacked. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the expensive cut of his coat. This wasn't some vagrant seeking shelter. "Several folders are missing from the health monitoring section," he reported, "and some of the test results from the early years." A string of curses filled the air. "Damn it! We should have cleaned this place out years ago. What do you want to do?" "Set up surveillance. Whoever took those files will either come back or try to contact someone about what they found. Either way, we'll be ready." Sarah closed her eyes, pressing harder against the cold metal. Whatever she'd stumbled into was bigger and more dangerous than she'd imagined. But as she thought of Emma sleeping at home, potentially poisoned by decades of corporate lies, she knew there was no going back now. Sarah's fingers trembled as she photographed each document with her phone's flashlight, the harsh shadows making the typewritten words appear to dance across the yellowed pages. The vault's concrete walls seemed to press closer with each revelation. Employee medical records showing unexplained illnesses, water contamination reports buried by company officials, death certificates with causes of death mysteriously altered from cancer to heart failure. The factory hadn't just manufactured textiles. It had been a testing ground for industrial chemicals, using the local water supply as a disposal system for decades. The residents of Millbrook had been unwitting test subjects in an experiment that had poisoned 3 generations. Her grandmother's cancer, her mother's early death, the miscarriage she'd suffered 5 years ago that doctors couldn't explain. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. A metallic scraping echoed from somewhere above. Sarah froze, listening to the silence that followed. Just the building settling, she told herself, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to work faster. The next folder contained correspondence between Hartwell Industries and government officials. Senators, EPA administrators, local politicians, all receiving substantial donations in exchange for their silence. The corruption web stretched from the small town of Millbrook all the way to Washington, D.C. One letter made her blood run cold. Dated just 6 months ago, it detailed plans to develop the factory site into luxury condominiums. The contaminated soil would be covered with a concrete foundation, sealing the evidence forever while creating a profitable real estate venture. Another sound from above, definitely footsteps this time. Heavy boots crossing the factory floor directly overhead. Sarah's hands shook as she grabbed the most damning documents, stuffing them into her jacket. She couldn't photograph everything, but she could take proof. The phone's battery was dying anyway, its weak light flickering ominously. The footsteps stopped. A voice called out, muffled but commanding. "Sarah Chen, we know you're in here." Ice flooded her veins. They knew her name. They knew exactly where she was. "Come out now, and we can discuss this like civilized people," the voice continued. Male, authoritative, with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You've seen something you weren't supposed to see, but we can work something out." Sarah looked desperately around the vault. The entrance was the only way out, and they were waiting for her upstairs. She was trapped 30 feet underground with nowhere to run. "Think about your daughter, Sarah. Emma, isn't it? 8 years old, attends Millbrook Elementary, such a bright girl." The threat hit like a physical blow. They knew about Emma. They knew everything. "You have 10 seconds to come up those stairs, or we pay Emma a visit." Sarah's mind raced. She could surrender, hand over the documents, and pray they'd leave her family alone. But people who poisoned entire towns for profit weren't known for keeping promises. Once they silenced her, Emma would still be a liability, a witness to her mother's disappearance. 7, 8, 9. She made her choice. Instead of heading for the stairs, Sarah dove deeper into the vault, searching frantically among the remaining files. There had to be something else, something she could use as leverage. "Time's up." The voice had lost its reasonable tone. Heavy footsteps clattered down the metal stairs. Flashlight beams swept across the concrete walls, growing brighter as they approached. Sarah's fingers found what she was looking for, a thick folder marked insurance policies. Inside were life insurance documents for every person who had died from the contamination. Policies that Hartwell Industries had secretly purchased on the lives of Millbrook residents, betting on their deaths from chemical exposure. It was beyond criminal. It was monstrous. She photographed the documents with her phone's dying battery, then forwarded everything to 3 different email addresses she'd memorized: a reporter at the state newspaper, an environmental lawyer she'd found online, and her sister in California. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Drop the phone and step away from the files. The beam of an industrial flashlight blinded her. Sarah held up her hands, phone hidden in her palm. "It's too late. I've already sent everything." A laugh cold and humorless. "Cell service doesn't reach down here, sweetheart. We made sure of that years ago." Her heart sank. The emails hadn't gone through. She was trapped with evidence that could bring down a corporate empire, and no way to get it to the outside world. "Now, let's talk about how we're going to handle this situation." The man stepped into view, expensive coat, perfectly groomed, with eyes like chips of ice. "My name is Mr. Graves, and I represent certain interested parties who would prefer this matter remain private." Sarah clutched the documents tighter. "People deserve to know what happened to them." "People deserve to live," Graves replied, "especially little girls who depend on their mothers to make smart choices." The vault walls seemed to close in around her as she faced an impossible decision. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in Sarah's pocket as she pushed Emma's stroller through the slushy streets toward the library. Her daughter babbled happily, oblivious to the weight of what they were carrying. Sarah had barely slept, her mind churning over the files she'd glimpsed in the factory's vault. Names, dates, financial transactions, all pointing to something far bigger than she'd imagined. The Millbrook Public Library sat on the corner of Main and Cedar, a brick building that had seen better days but still maintained free internet access. Sarah chose a computer terminal in the back corner, positioning herself where she could see both entrances. Emma played quietly with her stuffed rabbit in the stroller beside her. With trembling fingers, Sarah inserted the drive, the screen filled with folders labeled by year, stretching back 3 decades. She clicked on the most recent one, dated just 6 months ago. Financial records appeared, transfers between numbered accounts, payments to shell companies, bribes disguised as consulting fees. But it was the names that made her blood run cold. Mayor Patricia Hendricks, Police Chief Robert Martinez, State Representative James Caldwell. Even Jonathan Webb, the factory's supposed original owner, appeared throughout the documents. Sarah scrolled deeper, finding correspondence between these officials and something called the Clearwater Development Group. The emails detailed plans to acquire vast swaths of land around Millbrook at below-market prices, forcing out long-time residents through manufactured financial crises and selective law enforcement. Her hands shook as she read Webb's message from 2 years ago. The factory documentation must remain secure. If anyone discovers the true ownership structure or the federal contracts, everything unravels. The senator has too much invested to allow exposure. The senator. Sarah's stomach dropped as she found another folder labeled Federal Contracts, Confidential. Inside were documents showing the abandoned factory hadn't been abandoned at all. For the past 15 years, it had served as a black site for government experiments, pharmaceutical trials conducted on unknowing subjects, environmental tests that violated every safety protocol. The test subjects had been the homeless, the addicted, people society had forgotten, people like the man she'd seen yesterday, shuffling through town with that haunted look. Sarah realized with growing horror that Millbrook hadn't just been a dying industrial town. It had been deliberately selected as a testing ground because of its isolated location and vulnerable population. Emma's sudden cry snapped Sarah back to the present. A man in a dark coat was entering the library, scanning the computer area methodically. Sarah's heart hammered as she recognized him from the factory, one of Webb's security team. Moving with forced casualness, she ejected the USB drive and slipped it back into her pocket. She lifted Emma from the stroller, whispering soothingly while her mind raced. The man hadn't spotted her yet, but he was moving in her direction, checking each terminal. Sarah wheeled the stroller toward the children's section, keeping her head down. Through the shelves, she watched the man question the librarian, who gestured toward the computer area. He was looking for someone, looking for her. The back exit was 20 feet away, but reaching it meant crossing open space. Sarah pretended to browse picture books while edging closer to the rear door. Emma fussed, sensing her mother's tension. "Shh, baby," Sarah whispered. "Just a little longer." The man appeared at the end of the aisle, his eyes locking onto hers. Recognition flashed across his face, and his hand moved inside his jacket. Sarah didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. She sprinted toward the exit, pushing the stroller ahead of her. Behind her, she heard the man's heavy footsteps and the librarian's startled protest. The back door burst open under Sarah's desperate shove, and cold air hit her face like a slap. The alley behind the library was narrow and cluttered with dumpsters. Sarah navigated around the obstacles, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. At the alley's mouth, she risked a glance back. The man was pursuing her, speaking urgently into a phone. Sarah emerged onto Pine Street and immediately ducked into Murphy's hardware store. The elderly owner looked up from his newspaper with mild surprise. "Everything all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Fine," Sarah gasped, positioning herself behind a display of snow shovels where she could watch the street. "Just needed to get Emma out of the cold." Through the window, she saw the dark-coated man emerge from the alley. He looked left and right, then spoke into his phone again. Two more men appeared at the far end of the street, moving with the same purposeful stride. They were coordinating a search. Sarah realized with crystal clarity that her life had just changed forever. The men outside weren't just trying to recover stolen information. They were hunting her because she now represented an existential threat to whatever conspiracy had been using Millbrook as their private laboratory. Emma reached up and touched her mother's face with tiny fingers, as if sensing the moment everything shifted. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, she would expose the truth. But first, she had to survive long enough to tell it. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the digital files on the laptop, each document more damning than the last. The factory's generator hummed in the background, its steady rhythm doing nothing to calm her racing heart. She'd been at this for 3 hours now, and the scope of what she'd uncovered made her stomach turn. The Meridian Corporation wasn't just another conglomerate. It was a carefully constructed shell hiding decades of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Defense contracts awarded through bribery, environmental disasters covered up with falsified reports, whistleblowers who'd mysteriously disappeared or died in convenient accidents. She paused at a folder labeled Project Clearwater and clicked it open. Her blood ran cold as she read the summary. Toxic waste dumps, contaminated water supplies, cover-ups spanning 3 states. The cost in human lives was staggering. Cancer clusters, birth defects, entire communities poisoned while Meridian's executives counted their profits. A photograph caught her attention. She recognized the location immediately, Millfield, her hometown. The image showed workers in hazmat suits dumping barrels into the old quarry, the same quarry where she and Emma had picnicked just last summer. The timestamp read 15 years ago. "Jesus," she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty vault. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Henderson. "Emma's been asking about you. When will you be back?" Sarah stared at the message, guilt gnawing at her. She'd told her neighbor she had a job interview in the city and wouldn't be back until evening. Another lie to add to the growing pile. But how could she explain this? How could she tell anyone what she'd found without putting them in danger? She took screenshots of the most damaging documents, her phone's memory filling rapidly. Each image represented a life destroyed, a family devastated, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized the factory's front door was opening. She quickly closed the laptop and shoved it back into the safe, her movements clumsy with panic. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by voices. At least 2 people, maybe more. "Should have been destroyed years ago," a man was saying, his voice carrying down through the building. Henderson swore he handled it, another replied. Apparently, he lied. Sarah recognized the name. Not Mrs. Henderson. This had to be someone else entirely. Her mind raced as she tried to remember where she'd seen it in the files. The vault door was still open, and she could hear them descending the stairs now. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The space was too small, too exposed. She pressed herself against the far wall of the vault, hoping desperately that they wouldn't look inside. "Motion sensors picked up activity here yesterday," the first voice said. "Someone's been snooping around." Could be kids. Homeless. This place has been a magnet for troublemakers since we had to shut it down so suddenly. The voice was bitter, angry. 20 years of careful planning and it all went to hell because Henderson got greedy. Sarah held her breath as their footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A beam of light swept across the opening of the vault, missing her by inches. She pressed harder against the wall, the metal surface cold against her back. "The safe's been opened recently," one of them observed. "Dust patterns are all wrong." Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it. She'd been careless, too excited by her discovery to consider the possibility that others might be watching, waiting. "Get Castellanos on the phone," the second voice commanded. "We need a clean-up crew here tonight. Full sweep. What about whoever's been poking around? Find them. Quietly." The footsteps began to retreat, but Sarah didn't dare move. She remained frozen against the wall for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When she finally heard the front door slam shut above, she allowed herself to breathe again. She waited another 10 minutes before emerging from the vault, every shadow seeming to conceal a threat. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Mrs. Henderson. Panic shot through her as she realized how long she'd been gone. As she climbed the stairs, one thought dominated her mind. They knew someone had been here. They would be watching now, waiting. And somehow she had to get home to Emma without leading them straight to her daughter. The drive back to town felt endless, every car in her rearview mirror a potential threat. She took a circuitous route, doubling back twice to make sure she wasn't being followed. The weight of the knowledge she carried felt heavier with each mile, but she knew there was no going back now. She had enough evidence to bring down Meridian Corporation and everyone involved in their conspiracy. The question was whether she'd live long enough to use it. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Sarah's trembling hands. Marcus stood beside her in the cramped motel room, his eyes fixed on the yellowed paper as she carefully broke the wax seal. The musty smell of decades-old secrets filled the air between them. Inside, a single photograph and a handwritten letter on official letterhead. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the logo, Meridian Industries, the same company whose documents filled the vault. But this letter was different, personal. "My dearest Catherine," Sarah read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "By the time you read this, I will likely be dead. What we discovered in the testing facility cannot see the light of day, not while Senator Morrison and his associates control the narrative. The chemical compound we developed, designation MK77, was never meant for agricultural use as reported. It was designed for population control." Marcus grabbed her arm. "Population control? Jesus, Sarah, what kind of operation were they running?" Sarah's hands shook as she continued reading. "The trials in Cambodia were successful beyond our projections, entire villages rendered sterile within months of exposure. Morrison plans to introduce it into water supplies in targeted regions. I cannot be part of this genocide. I've documented everything, the real test results, the funding sources, the implementation timeline. It's all in the vault. Trust no one in the government. They're all compromised. Take the evidence to Elena Vasquez at the Tribune. She's the only journalist who can't be bought. Tell her Catherine Winters sent you. Tell her the Garden of Eden was always meant to be a graveyard." The letter was signed with a shaky hand, Dr. James Holloway, March 15, 1975. "Holloway," Marcus breathed. That name was on half the documents in the vault. He was the head scientist. Sarah turned the photograph over. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stood next to a younger man in a lab coat. On the back, someone had written, "Catherine and James, before we knew the truth." "We have to find Catherine," Sarah said, her mind racing. "She might still be alive. She's the key to understanding all of this." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'll run a search on Catherine Winters." "But Sarah, you realize what this means? If even half of this is true, we're not just talking about corporate corruption. This is government-sanctioned chemical warfare against civilian populations." A heavy knock echoed through the room. Both of them froze. "Housekeeping," came a muffled voice from the hallway. Sarah glanced at her watch. It was nearly midnight. Her blood ran cold. "We didn't request housekeeping." Marcus was already moving, stuffing the letter and photograph back into the envelope. Back window. Now, another knock, more insistent this time. The doorknob rattled. Sarah grabbed her jacket and the manila envelope while Marcus cracked open the bathroom window. The cold night air rushed in as he helped her climb through onto the fire escape. Behind them, they heard the unmistakable sound of a keycard sliding through the lock. They dropped into the alley just as footsteps echoed in the room above. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as they pressed themselves against the dumpster, hidden in shadows. "Clear," came a voice from the window. "But the bed's still warm. They were here recently. Fan out. Check the parking garage and surrounding blocks." They couldn't have gone far. Sarah recognized that voice. Detective Morrison. The same man who'd been asking questions about her at Jake's house. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Morrison, Senator Morrison. It couldn't be a coincidence. Marcus tugged her sleeve, leading her deeper into the maze of alleys behind the motel. They moved in silence, their breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made Sarah's pulse spike. 20 minutes later, they emerged 6 blocks away at an all-night diner. Sarah's legs finally gave out as they slid into a corner booth, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. "They found us," she whispered. "How did they find us so fast?" Marcus's expression was grim. "Professional surveillance. We're dealing with people who have serious resources." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Sarah, we can't go back to our normal lives. Not now. They know we have the information." "Emma," Sarah gasped, fumbling for her phone. "I have to call my sister. If they know about me—" "Don't use your phone," Marcus warned. "They could be tracking it." The waitress approached, and Marcus ordered 2 coffees with cash. When she left, he continued. "We need to find Catherine Winters and Elena Vasquez. But first, we need to make sure your family is safe." Sarah stared out the window at the empty street, searching for any sign of their pursuers. Somewhere out there, powerful people were mobilizing to silence them permanently. The weight of Dr. Holloway's letter pressed against her chest like a stone. The truth was more terrible than she'd imagined, and now there was no turning back. The abandoned gas station squatted like a diseased animal against the grey morning sky. Sarah pulled into the cracked parking lot, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. 3 days had passed since she'd discovered the vault, and sleep had become a stranger. Every shadow could hide watching eyes, every car behind her might be following. She'd chosen this meeting place deliberately, public enough to feel safe, isolated enough to avoid curious ears. Marcus Chen had agreed to meet her here after she'd called him from a payphone outside Emma's school. The investigative journalist had sounded skeptical at first, but something in her voice must have convinced him. A black sedan pulled up beside her rusted Honda, and Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. But it was Marcus who emerged, a slight man in his 50s with prematurely grey hair and wire-rimmed, glasses that caught the pale sunlight. She recognized him from his byline photo in the Tribune. "Sarah Martinez?" He approached her window cautiously, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She nodded, stepping out of her car. The manila envelope containing photocopies of the vault documents felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hands. "Thank you for coming. Your call was intriguing." Marcus glanced around the empty lot. "You said you had information about Meridian Industries?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She'd researched Marcus after finding his name in connection with a series of articles about corporate corruption. He'd been digging into Meridian for months, she'd learned, but had never been able to prove the connections he suspected. More than information. She held out the envelope. Proof. Marcus accepted it with raised eyebrows, opening it carefully. His expression shifted from mild interest to stunned disbelief as he flipped through the pages. Financial records, correspondence, technical specifications, all bearing the Meridian letterhead and executive signatures. "Where did you get these?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" "It matters if you want me to print this story without both of us ending up dead." Marcus looked up from the documents, his face pale. "Do you understand what you've brought me?" Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling the bite of the wind. "I think so. This is evidence of a cover-up that goes back 30 years. Illegal weapons testing, environmental contamination, bribes to federal officials." He shuffled through the papers again, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Senator Whitfield's name is all over these documents. He's running for president. Not if this comes out." Marcus carefully placed the documents back in the envelope. "Where's the original vault?" Sarah hesitated. Once she told him there would be no going back. "I need guarantees, protection for my family. I can't guarantee anything beyond doing my job, getting the truth out there." Marcus's expression softened slightly. But keeping this secret won't protect you. If they suspect you have these documents, a chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. What do you mean? 3 people have died in the past 5 years while investigating Meridian. Car accidents, heart attack, suicide, all very clean, very convenient. Marcus glanced at his watch. How long have you had these? 3 days. Then you're already on borrowed time. The sound of an approaching vehicle made them both turn. A white van was pulling into the lot, moving slowly. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the driver, the same man who'd been watching her house. We need to go, now. Marcus grabbed her arm, his journalist's instincts sharp with danger. But the van had positioned itself between them and the road. A second vehicle, a dark SUV, emerged from behind the station building. Sarah realized with growing terror that they'd been watching, waiting. The woods, Marcus hissed, pointing toward a line of pine trees behind the station. Run! They sprinted across the broken asphalt as car doors slammed behind them. Sarah clutched the spare copies she'd hidden in her jacket, her insurance policy. Her lungs burned as they crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at their clothes. Stop running! The voice behind them was calm, almost conversational. We just want to talk, Mrs. Martinez. Marcus grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the forest. They could hear their pursuers crashing through the trees, gaining ground. Sarah's mind raced. Emma would be getting out of school in 4 hours. She'd promised to pick her up. A gunshot cracked through the air, splintering bark inches from Sarah's head. They weren't planning to talk. This way, Marcus gasped, leading her toward the sound of running water. A creek cut through the forest, its banks steep and treacherous. Without hesitation, he plunged down the slope. Sarah followed, the icy water shocking her system as it filled her shoes. Behind them, the voices grew more distant, confused by their change of direction. They had minutes, maybe less, before their hunters adapted. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, but it was better than being trapped in her apartment. Sarah crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, clutching the flash drive that contained everything: the financial records, the correspondence, the damning evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the country. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Marcus, but she couldn't risk answering. Not yet. Footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. Sarah's heart hammered as she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, watching a beam of light sweep across the concrete floor. They'd found her faster than she'd anticipated. I know you're in here, Sarah. The voice belonged to Dr. Reeves, but it carried none of the warmth she remembered from their earlier encounters. Let's be reasonable about this. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of Emma asleep at her grandmother's house, blissfully unaware that her mother was being hunted. The image strengthened her resolve. She'd made copies of everything and hidden them in 3 different locations throughout the city. Even if they caught her now, the truth would survive. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Reeves continued, his footsteps growing closer. Those files represent decades of carefully orchestrated policy, national security decisions that kept this country stable. Sarah bit back a bitter laugh. National security, as if systematically poisoning an entire community could ever be justified under that banner. The documents had revealed everything: how the factory's toxic waste had been deliberately allowed to seep into the groundwater, how the resulting health crisis had been covered up, how the victims' families had been paid hush money while being told their loved ones died from unrelated causes. A second set of footsteps joined the first. Sarah recognized the heavy gait of the man who'd been following her for days. Corporate security, probably ex-military judging by his movements. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but she still had one advantage. She knew this warehouse. She'd explored every inch of it during the 3 hours she'd been hiding here, mapping escape routes and identifying potential weapons. The beam of light swept closer. Sarah grabbed a piece of rusted rebar from the debris at her feet and prepared to move. She had to reach the service tunnel she'd discovered in the basement, a forgotten maintenance passage that connected to the old subway system. Your daughter is beautiful, Reeves said casually, and Sarah's blood turned to ice. Emma, isn't it? 8 years old, attends Roosevelt Elementary, lives with you in apartment 4B on Maple Street. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah's grip tightened on the rebar as rage flooded her system. They could threaten her, hunt her, even kill her, but bringing Emma into this crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She rose from her hiding spot, letting her footsteps echo deliberately. If you touch my daughter, I'll make sure every news outlet in the country gets copies of those files. Reeves emerged from behind a concrete pillar, flanked by his security detail. He looked older than she remembered, his face gaunt in the harsh glare of the flashlight. You're assuming you'll be in a position to do anything at all. The people I represent have resources you can't imagine. They've been protecting secrets far more sensitive than this for generations. Then they should have done a better job disposing of the evidence, Sarah shot back. Or maybe they should have thought twice before turning an entire neighborhood into a cancer cluster. The security guard took a step forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. Sarah raised the rebar, her muscles coiled for action. She'd never been in a real fight in her life, but desperation had a way of unlocking hidden reserves of strength. Wait, Reeves held up a hand. There's another way to handle this. You're a struggling single mother, Sarah. Your financial situation is precarious. We could change that, permanently. Sarah's laugh was harsh and bitter. You think I can be bought? After everything I've seen? Everyone can be bought. It's just a matter of finding the right currency. Reeves pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph. Emma's school has excellent security, but accidents happen. Children get lost, wander into traffic, fall downstairs. The threat shattered something inside Sarah. Without conscious thought, she hurled the rebar with all her strength. It struck the security guard in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a curse. Sarah was already moving, sprinting toward the stairwell that led to the basement. Shouts erupted behind her as she bounded down the concrete steps, 3 at a time. A gunshot echoed through the warehouse, and chips of concrete exploded near her head. The service tunnel was just ahead, a narrow opening barely visible behind a rusted grate. She'd burned her bridges now. There was no going back, no negotiating, no peaceful resolution. It was war, and Emma was caught in the crossfire. Sarah squeezed through the tunnel entrance as footsteps thundered down the stairs behind her. The safe house felt like a tomb. Sarah stared at the ceiling, listening to Emma's labored breathing from the narrow bed beside her. 3 days had passed since they'd fled the cabin, and her daughter's condition was worsening. The antibiotics Marcus had provided weren't working fast enough, and Emma's fever had spiked again during the night. Marcus stood by the window, peering through a gap in the blackout curtains. No movement on the street. We're still clear. Sarah sat up, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. I need to get her to a hospital. Sarah, we've been through this. The moment you show up... Look at her. Sarah's voice cracked. She can barely keep her eyes open. I won't watch my daughter die because I was too scared to... Her phone buzzed. Marcus tensed, hand moving to his weapon, but Sarah recognized the number. Detective Rivera, don't answer it, Marcus warned. Sarah hesitated, then swiped to accept the call. Hello? Sarah, thank God. Are you safe? For now. What do you want? I have news about the documents you found. We've been working with federal prosecutors, and they're ready to move. But they need your testimony to make the charges stick. Marcus was shaking his head violently, but Sarah pressed on. What kind of charges? Conspiracy, money laundering, accessory to murder. We're talking about bringing down some very powerful people. But Sarah, I need to warn you. We intercepted communications suggesting they're closing in on your location. Sarah's blood ran cold. How? Financial tracking, surveillance networks. These people have resources we're only beginning to understand. You need to move now. Emma stirred on the bed, mumbling incoherently. Sarah felt the walls closing in from all sides. I can't keep running. My daughter needs medical attention. I can help with that. There's a federal facility in Pittsburgh, high-security medical wing. We can get Emma the treatment she needs while keeping you both protected. Marcus grabbed the phone from Sarah's hand. This is a trap. You can't trust anyone in law enforcement. Half of them are probably on Hawthorne's payroll. Who is this? Rivera's voice came through the speaker. Someone trying to keep them alive, Marcus replied. Your federal facility is a joke. These people have connections everywhere. Look, whoever you are, I understand your paranoia, but we're running out of options. In 6 hours, there's going to be a coordinated arrest operation. If Sarah isn't in protective custody by then, she becomes a liability they can't afford to leave breathing. Sarah snatched the phone back. What aren't you telling me? A long pause. The factory you found? It's not the only one. We've identified at least 4 other locations across 3 states. This conspiracy goes back decades. Involves major defense contractors, politicians, judges. The people trying to kill you aren't just covering up embezzlement. They're protecting a network that's been manipulating government contracts worth billions. The weight of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd stumbled into something vast and ancient, a cancer that had been growing in secret for generations. Something else, Rivera continued. Your ex-husband? David? He's been asking questions, trying to find you. Word is someone approached him, offered money for information about your whereabouts. Sarah's heart stopped. David wouldn't. Money makes people do terrible things, Sarah. Especially when it's a lot of money. Marcus was already moving, grabbing their emergency bags from the closet. We leave now. Can't trust the ex, can't trust the cops, can't trust anyone. Wait. Sarah's mind raced. Detective Rivera, the federal operation, when exactly is it happening? Why? Because I have an idea, but I need guarantees. Full immunity for my daughter, witness protection after this is over, and immediate medical treatment. Sarah, what are you thinking? Marcus stopped packing. I'm thinking about leverage. They want me dead because I have evidence. But if that evidence becomes public before they can silence me, it's too dangerous, Rivera said. If you surface before we can protect you. I'm not surfacing. I'm going underground, literally. Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. The factory. They think I took everything, but I didn't. There's more down there, isn't there? More evidence. Marcus nodded slowly. The lower levels. We never fully explored them. Then that's where we go. While everyone is looking for us up here, we disappear below. And when your federal operation starts, Detective Rivera, I'll be ready with everything I can find. Sarah, this is insane. You can't take your sick daughter into an abandoned... I can't take her anywhere else. At least down there, no one will think to look for us. Emma's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her mother's face. Mommy, are we going home soon? Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, her decision made. Yes, baby, we're going home. The abandoned mine shaft stretched into darkness ahead of them, its walls slick with moisture that caught the beam of Sarah's flashlight. Marcus moved beside her with practiced efficiency, his emergency pack bouncing against his back as they descended the narrow path carved into rock. Behind them, Emma's small hand gripped the safety rope with white knuckles. How much further? Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to keep her voice low. The oppressive weight of stone above them seemed to demand reverence. Quarter mile, maybe less. Marcus checked his GPS device, frowning at the weak signal. This connects to the old railway tunnel that runs beneath Highway 9. From there, we can reach the state forest without crossing any roads. Sarah's phone buzzed against her thigh. She pulled it out, seeing Jake's name on the screen, and felt her chest tighten. They'd been underground for 20 minutes, long enough for him to discover they weren't at the motel. Don't answer it, Marcus said, noticing her hesitation. They're probably tracking your calls by now. She powered off the phone, severing their last connection to the outside world. The darkness seemed to press closer, and Emma's breathing echoed off the tunnel walls like whispered prayers. Mom, I'm scared. Emma's voice cracked with exhaustion. They'd been running for 6 hours. first by car through back roads, then on foot when Marcus insisted vehicles were too easy to track. "I know, baby. We're almost through this part." Sarah reached back to squeeze her daughter's hand, feeling the tremor in those small fingers. This wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Emma should be in school, worried about homework and friends, not fleeing through underground tunnels because her mother had stumbled onto something that powerful men would kill for. The memory of Detective Harrison's body in the motel bathroom flashed through her mind again, the way his eyes had stared at nothing, the growing pool of crimson beneath his head. They'd made it look like suicide, but Sarah had seen the bruising on his knuckles, the overturned chair that didn't match the supposed hanging. He'd fought back. "Sarah!" Marcus stopped abruptly, holding up his hand. "Listen." The tunnel fell silent except for their breathing and the distant drip of water. Then Sarah heard it, the low rumble of engines somewhere above them, muffled by layers of earth and stone. "Could be anyone," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her hope. Marcus shook his head grimly. "Not out here. This whole area's been closed to mining for 15 years. There's no legitimate reason for vehicles." He shouldered his pack more securely. "We need to move faster." They pressed forward, Sarah's legs burning with the effort of navigating the uneven ground while supporting Emma's weight. The flashlight beam revealed ancient wooden support beams, some sagging with age and moisture. In several places, Marcus had to test the ceiling carefully before allowing them to pass beneath. "The documents," Sarah panted as they climbed over a fallen beam. "Are they really worth all this?" "Those financial records don't just show embezzlement," Marcus replied without slowing his pace. "They show systematic looting of pension funds, environmental cleanup money, disaster relief allocations. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars over 2 decades. Money that should have gone to hurricane victims, cancer treatments for chemical plant workers, retirement funds for teachers." Emma stumbled, and Sarah caught her before she could fall. Her daughter's face was pale in the flashlight beam, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "I can't. I need to rest. Just a little further, Em. You're doing so good." But even as she encouraged her daughter, Sarah felt doubt gnawing at her resolve. What if Jake was right? What if the smart thing was to destroy the evidence and disappear? She could take Emma somewhere far away, maybe Canada or Mexico, and they could start over. New names, new lives, free from the terror that had consumed their world. The tunnel began to slope upward, and cooler air touched Sarah's face. Marcus consulted his GPS again, nodding with satisfaction. "We're almost at the railway junction. From there, it's only 2 miles through the forest to the ranger station." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "We hand over the documents and hope these people don't find us before the investigation starts. Hope they don't have judges and prosecutors on their payroll too." Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the wavering light. "Then we trust that some things are bigger than fear, that some secrets are too important to stay buried." Above them, the engine sounds grew louder, more distinct. Multiple vehicles now, moving with purpose across the landscape. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of choice pressing down like the thousands of tons of rock above their heads. When she opened them again, Emma was watching her with those trusting brown eyes that had been her anchor through every difficult decision of the past 5 years. "Okay," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "Let's go expose some truth." The safe house felt like a tomb. Sarah paced the small living room while Emma slept fitfully on the couch, her small body curled beneath a threadbare blanket. Marcus sat hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, the blue glow illuminating the exhaustion etched deep in his features. They'd been here 3 days, and the walls seemed to shrink with each passing hour. "The documents are ready," Marcus said without looking up. "I've created multiple redundancies, cloud storage, deadman switches, contacts at 5 different news outlets. If something happens to us, everything goes public automatically." Sarah stopped pacing. "That's not enough anymore." "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her decision crystallizing like ice in her chest. "They killed Detective Rodriguez. They burned down my apartment. They're not going to stop because we're hiding in some cabin in the middle of nowhere." Marcus finally looked up, and she could see the fear he'd been trying to hide. "Sarah, we agreed—" "No, you told me what you thought was best, but I'm not spending the rest of my life running." She glanced at Emma, whose peaceful sleep belied the nightmare their lives had become. She deserves better than this. The sound of gravel crunching outside made them both freeze. Marcus closed the laptop with deliberate calm while Sarah moved silently to Emma's side. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. "Back room," Marcus whispered, but Sarah was already scooping Emma into her arms. Her daughter stirred but didn't wake, a small mercy in a world that had offered precious few. They crept down the narrow hallway as the sound of car doors slamming echoed outside. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as Marcus guided them into the bedroom at the rear of the house. He pressed a key into her hand, the key to his motorcycle, hidden in the shed behind the cabin. "Take Emma and go," he breathed against her ear. "There's a dirt road that leads to the highway. Don't stop until you reach the state police barracks in Millbrook. I'm not leaving you. You have to." His eyes were fierce in the darkness. "Someone needs to tell this story. Someone needs to make sure those bastards pay." The front door splintered with a crash that made Emma jerk awake. Sarah clamped her hand over her daughter's mouth before she could cry out, feeling the small body trembling against her chest. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house, accompanied by voices she didn't recognize, but whose intent was unmistakable. Marcus cracked the bedroom window while Sarah whispered reassurances to Emma. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of freedom. He helped her climb through first, then handed Emma down to her waiting arms. "The USB drive," he whispered, pressing the small device into her palm, along with the motorcycle key. "Everything's on there. Don't trust anyone connected to the factory or Meridian Industries. Go to the press first, then the FBI. Marcus, go." She ran, Emma clinging to her neck as they stumbled through the darkness toward the shed. Behind them, she could hear shouts and the sound of doors being kicked in. A beam of light swept across the yard, missing them by inches. The motorcycle started on the second try, its engine roaring to life in the stillness. Sarah had ridden before, years ago, but never with a child and never while running for their lives. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's waist as they burst from the shed and onto the narrow dirt road. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by the crack of gunfire. Sarah hunched low over the handlebars, willing the bike to go faster as branches whipped past their faces. The headlight carved a pale tunnel through the forest, revealing nothing but trees and the rutted path ahead. More shots rang out, and she heard the distant roar of engines starting up. They were being pursued, but the motorcycle was smaller and more maneuverable than whatever vehicles their hunters were using. If she could just reach the highway. The road curved sharply to the left, and Sarah felt the bike slide on loose gravel. For a terrifying moment she thought they would go down, but somehow she managed to keep them upright. Emma's grip tightened around her waist, and Sarah could feel her daughter's tears soaking through her jacket. Behind them, the pursuit was falling back, the forest too dense and the path too treacherous for larger vehicles. But Sarah knew this was only a temporary reprieve. They would find other roads, other ways to cut them off. As they finally reached the highway, Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct screaming at her to run and hide. Instead of turning toward the state police barracks, she headed south, toward the city, toward the offices of Channel 7 News, where she'd seen investigative reporter Janet Morrison expose corruption and lies night after night. It was time to stop running. It was time to fight back. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the final document in the vault. The letterhead bore the seal of the Environmental Protection Agency, but the signature at the bottom belonged to someone she recognized from the news. Senator Patricia Hawthorne, the woman who'd built her career on environmental reform. The hypocrisy was staggering. While publicly championing clean water initiatives, Hawthorne had privately authorized the dumping of industrial waste that had poisoned 3 counties. The deaths weren't accidental, they were calculated costs in a profit margin. "Mom?" Jake's voice cracked through the silence. He stood in the vault's entrance, his face pale in the harsh LED light. "There are cars coming up the road." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She could hear the distant rumble of engines growing closer. Her mind raced through the options, none of them good. The factory had only one accessible exit, and whoever was coming would reach it before she could gather everything and run. "How many cars?" she whispered, shoving documents into her backpack with desperate efficiency. 3, maybe 4. They're moving fast. Emma appeared beside her brother, clutching her tablet. "I uploaded everything to the cloud servers before they cut our internet. But if they find us here, they won't." Sarah's voice carried more conviction than she felt. She sealed the final batch of documents in a waterproof bag and tucked it inside her coat. "Jake, is the snowmobile ready?" "Yeah, but Mom, the trail leads right past where they're coming from." Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain around the factory. There was another way out, through the collapsed section of the building's east wing. It would mean climbing through twisted metal and unstable debris, but it might be their only chance. "We're going through the wreckage," she decided. "Emma, leave the tablet. We can't carry anything that might slow us down. But all my work is already uploaded. That's what matters." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the factory's hollow spaces. Sarah grabbed her children's hands and led them deeper into the building, away from the main entrance. Her flashlight beam swept across the devastation where the roof had collapsed years ago, creating a maze of concrete and steel. Behind them, she heard voices, multiple people coordinating a search. They moved with military precision, splitting up to cover more ground. These weren't local thugs or corporate security. Someone had sent professionals. "This way," Sarah breathed, squeezing through a gap between 2 fallen beams. Jake followed, then helped Emma navigate the narrow opening. The metal groaned ominously overhead. Sarah's heart hammered as she imagined the entire section collapsing and trapping them. But the voices were getting closer, and she could see flashlight beams sweeping the main factory floor. They crawled through the debris field on their hands and knees, following a path that Sarah hoped would lead to the exterior wall. The cold bit through her gloves, and she could hear Emma's labored breathing behind her. "There," Jake whispered, pointing ahead. A section of the outer wall had crumbled, creating an opening just large enough for them to slip through. Sarah went first, pushing through the gap and dropping into the snow outside. The wind hit her like a physical blow, but she'd never been so grateful for the storm's cover. She helped her children through the opening, then looked back at the factory. Through the broken windows, she could see flashlights moving systematically through the building. It would only be minutes before they discovered the vault and realized what had been taken. The snowmobile was hidden in a cluster of trees 50 yards away. Sarah led her family in a wide circle, staying low and using the storm as camouflage. Her feet had gone numb in her boots, and Emma stumbled repeatedly in the deep snow, but they kept moving. When they reached the snowmobile, Sarah's fingers were so cold she could barely work the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. Behind them, she heard shouts from the factory. "Come on," she pleaded, trying again. The engine caught with a roar that seemed impossibly loud in the winter silence. Sarah didn't wait to see if their pursuers had heard. She gunned the accelerator, sending the snowmobile lurching forward into the forest. Branches whipped past her face as they raced through the trees. She could hear other engines starting behind them, snowmobiles by the sound of it, professional hunters with professional equipment. But Sarah knew these woods. She'd been exploring them for weeks, learning every trail and deer path. Her pursuers might have superior machines, but she had desperation and knowledge of the terrain. The documents pressed against her chest as she leaned into a sharp turn. In her coat pocket, A USB drive contained enough evidence to bring down a senator and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Now she just had to survive long enough to use it. The safe house felt more like a prison with each passing hour. Sarah paced the cramped living room while Emma slept fitfully on the couch, her small frame curled beneath a threadbare blanket. Detective Morrison sat at the kitchen table, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones with someone from the FBI field office. "They're mobilizing a team," he said after ending the call. "But it'll take time to coordinate with multiple agencies. These documents implicate people across state lines, federal contractors, congressional staff." "We don't have time," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp with frustration. "Marcus knows we're out there. He knows what we have. Every minute we wait is another minute for them to clean house, destroy evidence, silence witnesses." Morrison's weathered face showed the strain of the past 24 hours. "Sarah, I understand your urgency, but we have to do this right. One misstep and everything falls apart. They have resources we can only dream of." Sarah moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains at the empty street below. The abandoned factory felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a week since she'd first broken through that basement wall. Her life had been simple then. Desperate, yes, but simple. Now she held the power to topple careers and expose decades of corruption, and that power felt like holding a live grenade. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number." "Don't answer it," Morrison warned, but Sarah was already swiping to accept the call. "Hello, Sarah." Marcus Chen's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I think it's time we talked. I have nothing to say to you." Sarah's hand trembled as she held the phone. "On the contrary, I believe we have a great deal to discuss. You have something that belongs to my clients, and they're very eager to have it returned. Your clients are war profiteers and murderers." A soft chuckle came through the speaker. "My clients are patriots who made difficult decisions during a difficult time. The Cold War required certain flexibility in our moral framework. Surely you can understand that." Morrison was frantically gesturing for her to keep him talking while he worked on tracing the call. "I understand that children died because of what they did," Sarah said. "I understand that families were destroyed while your clients got rich. Regrettable casualties of a larger conflict. But that's ancient history now. What matters is the future. Your future. Emma's future. Your daughter looks so peaceful when she sleeps, doesn't she?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. She spun around to look at Emma on the couch, then rushed to the window. Across the street, barely visible in the shadows between two buildings, a figure stood watching the house. "You bastard," she whispered. "Language, Sarah. There's no need for hostility. I'm offering you a way out. Return the documents, sign a simple non-disclosure agreement, and walk away with enough money to give Emma the life you've always wanted. College fund, new house, fresh start somewhere far from here." Morrison was on his radio, calling for backup, but Sarah knew they wouldn't arrive in time if Marcus decided to act. "And if I refuse, then you'll discover that some secrets are protected by more than just legal agreements. Your predecessors learned that lesson, though sadly they didn't live to share their newfound wisdom." Sarah looked at Emma, her heart breaking at her daughter's innocent face. Everything she'd done had been for Emma. The factory job she'd lost, the desperate search for scrap metal, even stumbling into this nightmare. But now her daughter was in more danger than ever. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't. But consider the alternative. Even if you somehow manage to expose this story, do you really think it will matter? A few executives will retire early, some government officials will resign, and the machine will keep running with new faces. Meanwhile, you and Emma will spend whatever time you have left looking over your shoulders." The figure across the street raised a hand to his ear. Another phone call, another team member. How many of them were out there? "I need time to think." "Of course. You have until midnight. I'll call with instructions for the exchange." The line went dead. Morrison finished his radio call and turned to her. "Backup is 10 minutes out. We need to move now." Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, then at the documents Morrison had photographed and uploaded to secure servers. The evidence was already out there, already in the hands of federal agents. But Marcus was right about one thing. Even if the story broke, would it really change anything? Or would it just make her and Emma permanent targets? She made her decision. "Wake Emma up," she said quietly. "But detective, when this is over, I need you to promise me something." Morrison paused in gathering their files. "What?" "Promise me that if something happens to me, you won't let this die. Don't let them win." "Sarah, promise me." He met her eyes and nodded grimly. "I promise." The encrypted files burned across Sarah's laptop screen in the dim light of the motel room. 3 days had passed since she'd fled the factory with Marcus, and each revelation made her stomach clench tighter. Chemical weapons testing, human experiments, children who had disappeared from foster care systems across 3 states, their records scrubbed clean as if they'd never existed. Emma slept fitfully on the bed beside her, fever finally breaking after 2 days of worry that had nearly driven Sarah to seek medical help. But hospitals meant records, and records meant they could be found. Marcus had made that crystal clear before he'd left to meet his contact at the newspaper. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the gun Marcus had given her, but the rhythm was their agreed signal. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his face grave. "We have a problem," he said, slipping inside. "My contact is dead. Car accident this morning, except the skid marks don't match the story." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "They found him, which means they know we have the files." Marcus moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the parking lot below. "We need to move. Now. Emma's still sick. She can't. She'll have to." His voice was gentle but firm. "Pack everything. 5 minutes." As Sarah threw their few belongings into bags with trembling hands, Marcus explained their new plan. Another journalist, someone he trusted implicitly, worked for a major network in Chicago. But getting there meant a 12-hour drive through territory where Blackwood Industries had significant influence. "There's something else," Marcus said as they loaded the car. "I've been tracking news reports. 3 other journalists who've investigated Blackwood in the past year are dead. All accidents, all within the last 72 hours. The weight of what they'd unleashed settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. These people weren't just covering up past crimes, they were systematically eliminating anyone who might expose them. Emma stirred as they drove through the pre-dawn darkness, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Mummy, are the bad men still chasing us?" Sarah met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We're going somewhere safe, sweetheart. Try to sleep." But safety felt like an impossible dream. Every set of headlights in the mirror made Sarah's pulse spike. Every police car they passed could be the one that would end everything. 3 hours into the drive, Marcus's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered on speaker, his voice cautious. "Marcus Chen? Who is this?" "Someone who wants to help. Pull over at the next rest stop. Blue sedan, license plate starting with KTM. Come alone." The line went dead. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances as the phone clattered to the console. "It's a trap," Sarah said immediately. "Maybe. But what if it isn't? What if there are others fighting this?" They argued for 10 miles before Marcus convinced her. The rest stop appeared ahead, and Sarah's heart hammered as she spotted the blue sedan immediately. A woman sat behind the wheel, middle-aged with graying hair and tired eyes. Marcus approached the car while Sarah watched from a distance, Emma sleeping in her arms. Through the windshield she could see the woman talking rapidly, occasionally pointing toward the highway. After several tense minutes, Marcus returned with a manila envelope. "She's FBI," he said quietly as they got back on the road. "Has been investigating Blackwood for 3 years. Says there's a task force, but they've been stonewalled at every turn. Too much political pressure." The envelope contained documents that made the factory files look tame by comparison. Congressional payoffs, federal judges on the Blackwood payroll, a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. "She wants us to go public," Marcus continued. Says it's the only way to protect ourselves now. Once it's out there, killing us becomes pointless. Sarah stared at the documents, thinking of Emma's future, of all the children who had suffered in that underground facility, of the families who would never know what happened to their loved ones. There's a press conference, Marcus said. Senator Wallace is announcing his presidential campaign tomorrow in Chicago. Live television, hundreds of reporters. If we can get there. The plan was audacious and terrifying. Infiltrate a major political event, somehow get access to the media and release everything at once. It would make them immediate targets, but it might also make them too visible to eliminate quietly. As Chicago's skyline appeared on the horizon, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, hope mixed with absolute terror. Tomorrow, one way or another, the truth would come out. Emma woke as they entered the city limits, her fever finally gone, eyes bright and curious about the tall buildings around them. Are we home now, Mummy? Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, knowing that after tomorrow, home might be a very different place than either of them imagined. Sarah's fingers trembled as she uploaded the final batch of documents to every major news outlet simultaneously. The abandoned factory's generator hummed beneath her, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to her racing heartbeat. Through the grimy windows, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness. They'd found her. Mom? Emma's voice cracked through the burner phone. The police are here. They say they're taking us somewhere safe. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Listen to me, sweetheart. Go with them. Detective Martinez will protect you and Tommy until this is over. But what about you? The headlights grew brighter. Sarah could hear engines shutting off, car doors slamming. I love you both more than anything, remember that. She ended the call before Emma could respond, knowing her daughter's voice would shatter her resolve. The upload progress bar hit 100% just as boots thundered across the factory floor above. Senator William Blackwood's voice echoed through the metal corridors. Mrs. Chen, you've caused quite a stir, but it's not too late to be reasonable. Sarah grabbed the external drive containing copies of everything, financial records proving decades of illegal arms deals, photographs of government officials accepting bribes, documented evidence of cover-ups that had cost countless lives. She tucked it inside her jacket and moved toward the factory's rear exit. The children are safe, Blackwood continued, his footsteps growing closer. But their continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation. Sarah's blood ran cold. He was lying, had to be lying. Martinez wouldn't let anything happen to Emma and Tommy, but doubt crept in like ice water through her veins. She reached the back door and found Marcus Rivera waiting in the shadows, his gun drawn but lowered. The investigative journalist who'd first helped her understand the magnitude of what she'd discovered looked haggard, conflicted. I'm sorry, Sarah. They have my sister. Marcus, the drive. Give me the drive and we all walk away. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her jacket. You know what's on there. You know what they've done. And you know what they'll do to our families if we don't comply. Behind them, Blackwood's men were systematically searching the factory. They had minutes at most. Sarah studied Marcus's face, seeing her own desperation reflected there. How many people had Blackwood's network destroyed? How many families had been torn apart to protect these secrets? The uploads already went through, she said quietly. Marcus's eyes widened. All of it. Everything we found. By morning it'll be on every front page, every news website. It's over, Marcus. A mixture of relief and terror crossed his features. They'll never stop coming for us. Maybe. But they'll be doing it in the spotlight now. Heavy footsteps approached from both directions. Blackwood emerged from the main corridor while his security team blocked the other exits. The senator looked remarkably calm for someone whose entire criminal enterprise had just been exposed. Impressive, he said, adjusting his expensive coat, though ultimately pointless. Do you really think a few news articles will bring down an organization that's been operating for 50 years? Sarah stood straighter. I think the truth has a way of spreading once it's out there. Blackwood smiled coldly. The truth is what people in power say it is. By noon tomorrow, every story about us will be branded as conspiracy theories, discredited sources, foreign disinformation. We've weathered worse storms, not with this much evidence. Evidence can be disputed. Witnesses, however." He nodded to his men. Sarah felt the walls closing in, but then her phone buzzed. "A text from Detective Martinez. Kids secure. FBI en route to your location. Keep him talking." "You're wrong about one thing," Sarah said, buying time. "This isn't just about evidence anymore. It's about people like me, like Marcus, like everyone you've stepped on over the years. We're not invisible anymore." Blackwood's composure cracked slightly. "You're a desperate single mother who broke into private property. Who do you think they'll believe? Let's find out." The sound of helicopters filled the air, followed by the unmistakable amplified voice of FBI agents ordering everyone to remain where they were. Blackwood's men looked uncertain, their loyalty apparently not extending to federal prison sentences. As tactical teams flooded the factory, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. The immediate danger was over, but she knew Blackwood was partially right. The real battle would be fought in courtrooms and newsrooms over the coming months. Marcus helped her to her feet as FBI agents secured the scene. "Think it'll stick?" he asked. Sarah watched Blackwood being read his rights, his mask of superiority finally slipping. "Some of it will. Maybe that's enough." Her phone rang. Emma's voice, tearful but alive. "Mom? They said you're okay. I'm coming home, baby. I'm finally coming home."